So, hello there.
Hi.
Here today we have a special guest. It's my former teacher, Marcos guest. He is my former teacher in Russia when I was make my master's degree, and he's still my business guide. And stay with me as a partner today. And always we have a good talks and good projects for developed together. Marcos, you are still teaching Mrs. I
Yes, I am.
didn't know it before.
Yep. Still teaching. Exam day on
Okay.
Thursday. So you remember the exam day. So yeah,
Yeah,
still
yeah,
teaching.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Why Marcos is here? Because in Moscow, when I was there, he presented to us as a student the most big revolution that you might say about how we can learn or make a good strategy for the business is a power maps. It's a Waterley maps, and it's much more better than SWOT analysis for sure. Nothing compare with it. I always asking myself, there's something that missing here. And when I saw the power maps in Moscow with Marcos, I was just like, okay, that's it. In fact, it's what missing for we think better about the strategy for the business. Marcos is still a teacher, as he said. He was a project lead of KPMG in Russia, and he has a huge knowledge of business and retail and different type of business. Well, Marcus, please present yourself a bit for us.
Okay. So originally I'm from England, but
Mhm.
I've been living in Asia, in Russia, and other countries on this continent for actually, I've worked it out. I've been living in this part of the world longer than I ever lived in England. So I'm now officially a foreigner. So yeah, I've spent a lot of time working in private business. I was a country director for a multinational based in Southeast Asia, headquartered in Shanghai. I was a general manager for a professional services firm here in Russia. I worked for a Russian holding company, as you also said, KPMG, where I was working in strategy. But for the last 10 years, I've been running my own business. And that business has been around helping organizations really make sense of the complex world in which they're operating. And that's why I started to teach at the university where we met, where I'm teaching a course on complexity and innovation. But for the last, I would say now it was 2004, so for the last 6 or 7 years, I've really been focused on using Wardley maps to help organizations get better awareness of what's going on around them, but also to improve their adaptiveness, their ability to exploit opportunities that they see and also guard against threats. So the opportunities and threats, they're the two parts of a SWOT analysis, but you're right, this isn't SWOT analysis. This is a very different way of approaching business. It's created by a man called Simon Wardley, who used to be a CEO of a tech company in the UK. So this would have been around getting on for 20 years ago now. And it really is, it's an approach that's sweeping business around the world. It's used widely by the likes of Amazon and Netflix and Salesforce, but also by governments. And that's really my mission, is to try to spread that approach. It's all open source. It doesn't cost anything in terms of having to buy anything to be able to use it. It's quite intuitive and it's quite powerful. And I think it's great for when, if you say you're trying to invest in another country, how do you go into that? There are so many moving parts, and it really helps to have a map that you can see everything in front of you, so people can challenge it and say, what are we missing? What have we got wrong? What could we be doing better? And so that's what I do, as well as teaching at the university.
Yeah, great, great. So that's why you're here, and because your brightness of about this and how you bring it and present it for Russia for us, and for me was like illuminate time of a business That's how it's very, very great one. So today our video is not power maps, it's the next one for sure. Today we speak about the market sensor. For me, it's a kind of complementary one with power maps, because power maps it's bring the solutions. They focus on the problem, the customers, but also for we do this, we need the information. So I would like ask you, what is a market sensors and how it could working with a power maps? Can you tell us a bit?
Yeah, well, I think if we just go back to maps for a moment, because there are 40 fundamental principles that mapping is based on, but there's one golden principle, and that principle is focus on user needs. And it sounds simple. And if you listen to the likes of, most people will quote Steve Jobs and say, Steve Jobs didn't listen to users. Apple just made insanely great products and sold them. That's quite naive. That's not actually what Apple did. Apple is one of those organizations that were fantastic at really understanding what users needed. Users may not know they needed an iPod, but they knew that they needed, what they didn't need was a DJ telling them which songs they should listen to. What they didn't need was a huge device to carry songs around in their pocket. They didn't know they needed an iPod, but they knew what they wanted and they knew what they didn't want. And so organizations that really try to understand, firstly, who your users are and what do they want. Now, wants are quite powerful because wants tend not to change. Yeah. This time of year, most people after New Year want to get fit again. Yeah. Now they have different ways. What do they need? Well, maybe this year I'm going to cut out drinking, or this year I'm going to change my diet, or I need to find a gym, or I need to start yoga. The needs are very different. They change with fashions. They change from person to person, but the wants are always the same. I want to get fit and healthy. So if you can focus firstly as your very first step on what do users want, you can then start figuring out what they might need or what you can offer them to satisfy those desires. So if you're going to a brand new country, of course, you want to look at the economy, you want to look at data around disposable income per capita, all these markers, the size of market, all of this is important. But the most important thing is to really see the world through your customer's eyes, to take their perspective, to walk in their shoes. And it doesn't have to be too sophisticated. You don't really need to gain a lot of big data. I mean, big data is great, but it doesn't mean the more data you have, the better the decisions that you make. It's all about what you do with that data. So what we discuss on our course when I was teaching you, Ruth, but also what I do with some of my clients is to get them to focus on thick data. So it's rich data. You don't need to be speaking to thousands of people. What you need is to have good quality conversations with enough people that you can start to understand what it means to be these people. What kind of lives are they living? What kind of desires that they have? But when you start to kind of get those stories, not where you're asking them 100 questions and ask them to tick on a box, but just to listen to them, ask them an open question. If you're, for example, let's just give an example of a bank, because I recently did some work with a bank where we asked their customers, tell us a story of a time when the bank delighted you or disappointed you. And so we allow people to then choose whether it's a story of delight or disappointment. And you will normally find it's about 70% of people will give positive stories, because if they gave negative stories, they're probably not your clients anymore. So you give people an opportunity just to talk a little bit about themselves and their experience and interaction with you. If you record this, that's a few minutes of a video, you can do it online. What you start to get is some very rich, thick data that if you show it to your marketing department, they will see one thing. If you show it to your R&D department, they will see something else. But this is always primary evidence. It's always going to be useful data. As I said, I was doing a project with a bank, and when we asked this, we asked somebody to share the most memorable time, as I said, a memorable story of delight or disappointment. and somebody shared a story from 9 years ago. And this was a story that was still upmost in their mind. So these stories that you collect, this evidence that you collect from users doesn't get old. You can look at it in 5 years' time, and those stories, because that person would have shared that story with other people, and those stories will circulate around. And what you're trying to do, I think, with Sense in the market is really trying to tap into the stories that are circulating within that market. Then once you understand those people, you understand their desires, then as a company, you can start to say, well, what is it that they're looking for that we can deliver? And I think that's kind of what I would advise any company going into to another country. Once they've identified that country and said, yes, the economic data, the macro, the micro, it works for us, your next step is focus on user needs. Because without that, you're going to be making huge mistakes. You're going to be designing the wrong things. You're going to be focusing on the wrong things. And I've worked with a lot of foreign direct investment companies, and always there's a story of a disaster going into a country, completely misreading the market, completely not understanding what's going on. When something goes wrong, having no idea how to correct it. But if you're going in first and you're speaking to a dozen or 24 potential users, because their stories are the stories, as I said, are being shared around that market. But you also start to build up contacts with these people who want to share stories with you, who want to engage with you. So whenever you have a problem, you instantly have a network of people, your customers, who you can turn to and ask questions, and they will give you this thick data, these responses, which you can then, as your team, listen to and then discover ways out of the problem or to discover better ways of doing things. And so I said that's the mapping method. The golden principle is, focus on your user needs. So I would say very much add that on to your foreign, to your investment strategy if you're going, or your market entry strategy if you're going into a new country. It's all about the users. And happily, I would say probably 85% of your competitors are not doing that. So if you do that, you have a huge advantage because you're probably the only ones who are really trying to see the world through the eyes of your customers.
Yes, that's the point that I ask always with my clients in Brazil, and that they still didn't understand why we need to make some kind of research about the clients there. If I have the data of the country, for example, the majority of them would like to go to France because it's a huge, big market. The first one with a high level, but they don't want to go to Russia. Most of don't like go to Russia because they even don't know what is Russia. Just know that it's a big country, and I don't know, some weird histories for Russia. But yes, but they don't know the market of Russia at all. But they would like to go to France, but go to France is quite really hard. And no French ones, you need to go deeper on it. So you cannot selling even in Russia. The customers is completely different. Some products here we need to follow the green campaign now, but in Russia some products they really don't care about that. Not because the Russians don't care about the environment, but it's the type of the campaign of some products. It means nothing for Russian ones. For the French ones, yes, it's meat. So what you talk, it's mean know better the customers, the clients deeper. It's really bring a lot of insights for the company, for they know where is the problem, where is the solution, how I can approach these customers and clients, and also mapping this. It's really clarify the mind of people about how go inside of the country.
I think it's also about fit as well, Ruth. So, I mean, if you think we want to go to France, I mean, there's very good reasons for certain companies to want to go to France. It's more stable, it seems. It's there's less uncertainty, it seems. If you go into a market sensor in France, where let's say you go and have 12 people interviewed, and it's like 3 or 4 minutes, and you got like 30-40 minute video that you can look and listen, and you put the right question in there. You allow people to talk. You get it subtitled, and you sit there as a team and you say, "Can we do something for these people?" But then you can do the same thing in a place like Russia, and when you listen to those people, it may just be, okay, we'd like to go to France, but actually we can satisfy the needs of those users in Russia far better than France. So maybe France has got all the other nice things that we'd like about it. We'd like to go on a business trip to Paris. It's nice to go to France. It's stable. It's Western Europe and everything. But actually, we have a better chance of winning on the Russian market because these people are looking for things that we can do. And then you put two other things together on top of that. One, as you said, France is a highly competitive market. Highly competitive. You're going to have to do something quite special to crack into that market, and it may take you a long time. But private business, has only been legal in this country for 34 years. So there are huge gaps in the market. There are some very sophisticated players, but there are some completely empty spaces. And if it just happens to be your space and you found that because you've listened to a dozen people talking about something, then you can turn around and say, okay, if we go into that market, it's completely new territory. We get to take the market because nobody else is doing this. And you've discovered that because you've listened to customers. But then I'm going to throw you one more fact. And this came from the World Bank last week. In purchasing power parity terms, GDP of Russia is now the largest economy in Europe. It's bigger than Germany as well. Now moved from 6th to 5th. So in PPP terms, which is the accurate way of really looking at the size of an economy, Russia is the largest European economy. It grew approximately between, depending on who you believe, 3.5% to 4% last year. The forecast range between 2.5% and 5% this year. So the world is changing quite dramatically. If you go into a market, it's going to take you 18 months to find your feet and start to get operations up and running. 3 to 5 years, you're going to start to say, we're really in this market. And then you look and say, well, in 5 years' time, by the end of this decade, where's the growth likely to be? Where's the long-range macro forecasts? Where's the best place to invest? Is it Western Europe? Is that where the growth is? Or is it going to be in the Eurasian continent? Because don't forget, Russia is a gateway into all the former Soviet republics, all these countries, Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, which are growing dramatically. So I think Russia has challenges, but we don't know how long these challenges are going to last. My own prediction would be we are coming towards the end of the phase that we're in. And I've long predicted a golden age for Russia because suddenly these are hugely well-educated people. There's a huge number of them. It's 145 plus million people, but very talented, very well-educated. And suddenly they're having to do everything themselves. The economy is growing. Unemployment's really low. These are kind of close to being boom times again, I think, in Russia, which is strange considering everything that's going on. But the economy is extremely strong. It's the largest consumer class. And we've just seen how the Chinese have entered and taken over the car market here, which has happened, last 18 months. You would see no Chinese cars 18 months ago. Now 40%, I think, of cars in Moscow would be Chinese. It's a fast-moving market with lots of opportunities. So it's definitely worth looking at, and it's definitely worth keeping your eye on. Because if it takes you, I don't know, excuse me, if it takes you 18 months to go into a market because you think about it, now's the time to start thinking about this market and really becoming aware of it, understanding what you can do. So when the timing's right, you can strike.
Yeah, exactly what I spoke with Valentin. It's okay. The Chinese and the Turkish ones, they really take advantage in the situation that we have now. because they starting selling a lot of cars. They are selling a lot of products and dominating the market. Of course, China now they take part in Africa, even in Brazil and Latin America as well. But we see that, for example, the electrical cars from China now it's even more big than Tesla itself. So do you think is because they are in Russia, that's why they grow so fast?
Well, I was reading about the Chinese electric vehicles, and I think having access to the Russian market has helped the Chinese firms suddenly become international, because the Chinese market's massive. Yeah? So you can be a global, not a global player, but you can be a globally powerful company by revenue just by having the Chinese market.
Yeah.
But you need a big enough market, because it's challenging to go international. I've worked with a lot of companies going international. I've been international. It's very different going into other countries.
Yeah.
So you need a market that's big enough to turn around and say, there's no point going into a small market with all the trouble and learning how to do it. You may as well go into a big market and have, big rewards if you get it right. And the Russian automobile market was the largest in Europe. I mean, it's I said 145 million people in this country. People own their own apartments because they were generally given apartments at the end of the Soviet Union. So the biggest expense for a Western European is a mortgage on a house. The biggest expense for a Russian is a car. And after a car, it's going to be holidays, or it's going to be personal items. So Russians have quite a large disposable income. And so the Chinese would have looked at it and said, that's a big enough market for us to finally go international. And when the Chinese do things, they tend to get things right, because strategically they're very smart. And actually the mapping, the Wardley mapping is really based on the Chinese approach to doing strategy. So it's not, or the Eastern approach to doing strategy. It's not about having a plan, because you don't control all the variables. So you can't plan everything, because there's just too much uncertainty, which is why sometimes people take the simple option and say, we go there where it's stable and it's certain, so we can have a plan. But the Eastern approach is, I think it's best described by Deng Xiaoping, which is we cross the river by feeling the stones. We make a move. And as we make a move, we have more awareness and we see what options we have in front of us. And then we make the next move and then the next move. And that's what China was able to do. But the first big step they had was to come into Russia, such a big market, that they've achieved it. And now they have confidence to go into other markets because they've cracked Europe's biggest car market. I mean, well done.
Yeah, that's it. Also, come back for the research with talking with customers and so on is a part of a market sensor as well. And anyway, when you explain, you also answer another question that I would like to do to you, is why we should do it. But is a qualified research that we do closer with the customers that bring the insights. It's a kind of research that the fashion that they do this a lot is they don't go speak closely with people for know the customers they always serve. They make a kind of a mapping as well, but they do the research in another way. In this case of market sensor and the mapping, we just go and speak with people and take the insights from them directly. And I think you can add some comments. It's quite a easy way for put on step to the country without the take too much risk, because if you speak with the people about one product, for example, cosmetics or another country, another product, metal products for some sector of industry very, very specified. I don't remember at this moment, but we can use it in fact for any kind of industry. The point is you can go and speak with the client the main user, and it's be much more easy for the company see by themselves where is the problem in the country, how can innovate, how can do
there you
something
go.
different.
That's the main thing. What you don't want when you're doing research is to have the researcher telling you what the insights are. Yeah, you don't want anybody having. I mean, I don't work in the industries you mentioned, the cosmetics, or I don't work in the banking industry, for example. So I wouldn't tell a bank or a cosmetics company that's what you should do, because I'm not the expert here. What you want is to put the company, who are an expert in their industry, together with potential clients so they can connect directly. And so the company can turn around and listen to what these clients are saying, whether it's B2C or whether it's B2B, listen to the stories that they're telling, not filling out questionnaires, but this is the story that I have, these are the experiences, that's what's positive, that's what's negative. And then the company will, when they're seeing that will trigger an insight in the company. Somebody in the company say, the salesperson say, well, we could be doing this. Or operations say, well, we could be doing that. And what you're doing is you're just adding in this very simple piece of work. As I said, if you're doing B2C and you just want to have a look, you can maybe go and speak to 15 or 20 people. And it maybe takes about 10 or 15 minutes each to interview those people. And it's not so much an interview, it's a couple of the same questions and everybody gives their response to the same questions. You put it together in a 30, 45-minute video and it goes to the client. And then the clients are then directly in touch with their potential users. And as I said, 85% of the competitors they will have on this market are not doing that. So even if you're sitting there in Brazil, you have a better insight into the customers than the people who are sitting here, because they're not talking to customers or focusing on their needs as much as they should. What this gives you is a quick and easy way of just plugging into your considerations about where you should go, the voice of the customer, the face of the customer, and to understand, wow, this is who they are. This is what, do we want to work with these people? Could we work with these people? Do we have something that they would be interested in? But as you said, the key thing is it's an insight, and an insight is a sudden shift to a better story. Suddenly we see something that we hadn't seen before, and we can exploit that opportunity. I think on our course, Ruth, I don't know whether you remember it, but I gave the example once of a company that had seen, they were a pharmaceutical company, and they'd seen a picture on an Instagram picture on an account where somebody had been using their product, but then was wrapping their leg. They'd used it on their leg and they wrapped their leg in cellophane, like plastic covering. And so they just asked, well, why are you doing that? And the person said, love your product. I don't know can't remember what product it was, but product's fantastic. Does everything it says it should do, but it stains this fabric that my trousers are made of. And the company had never heard of that. They'd never tested for that. They didn't know that was actually happening. And it was just a random one photograph on Instagram, and they followed it up. Which is why I say it's not about having big data. It's about having thick data that you turn into action, that you do something about. And when they asked this person, they found that, well, then they tried to replicate it in their lab. They found that this person was correct. And so they completely changed the product and they relaunched it as a better product. And that all came from just one story from one customer once. So if you get 12 or 15 stories or 12 or 15 customers sharing 2 or 3 stories each, you've actually got a rich amount of data that you can start to understand, can we do something for these people? And that's the kind of data you want to add together with your macro and micro data. You don't just want to look at spreadsheets, because you're not selling spreadsheets. You're selling whatever your product is to end users. And I think that's what you really want to be doing when you're looking at a new market, and if you do that in every country you go to, that then becomes, well, a better way of deciding which country is right for you. Because that first one says, okay, maybe you then do a second phase. We spoke to 12 or 15 people. Now we want to send some of our products over there, and we want to have perhaps a day where we have 40 or 50 people testing our products and playing with our products. And then what we'll do is we'll interview them on that day. So even without needing to go to the country, you could have really rich feedback from a group of people who've used your products and tell you what they think and feel about them as well. Again, not without a questionnaire, but in their own words, whether they feel, yes, people would like that here, or this isn't the right kind of thing for us here, or this would be better if you could do that. It's that kind of information that should draw you into a country. And I think a lot of businesses, they have all the macro data, but it's that final step which is the hardest to make. Why should we go there? And they think of all the risks. But once you can see your customers and hear your customers, that tells you yes or no. Can we do something here? So yeah, I would always add that to any kind of organization that's thinking of going to another country. If you don't do it, you turn up and you assume that people in this country are going to like the things that you do, and they may not. And that's going to be the biggest risk that you face. So yeah, it's quick and easy, and I think it's very rich in terms of the data that it gives you. But the main thing is that it could trigger some insights, trigger something that you haven't thought about before. And if you say, we can do something about that, that's what tells you this is the right market for you.
Yeah, exactly. I have one Russian client now that we starting talk about Brazil, and I spoke with them at, okay, this is good, this is nice, but this point here doesn't work in Brazil. Oh, why not? Because we want to do this, we do this in that in Europe and so on.
This is not Europe. Yeah, I think that's quite common. People assume that because it works well in Brazil, it will work well in Russia, and because it works well in Russia, it should work well in Australia. But yeah, you really do have to understand. And the only way to overcome that is, well, one is that you can invest in a country, and then 18 months later you can make huge amounts of mistakes, lose money, and then go, how could we be so stupid? Or you can actually start to focus on users before you go into the market and understand them, because at the end of the day, you are a success or a failure if you find a customer or not. If you find a customer, you keep a customer, your business is successful. If you don't find customers and you don't keep them, then you're not successful. So logically, speak to customers or potential customers first and understand what it is that they need, because I think too often companies try to make things and push them on to users. Of course you want this. Of course you'd like that. Of course this is fantastic. And they spend money on marketing and they spend money on sales teams. And that's just throwing more good money after bad money if it's the wrong thing for you to do. What you need to do is find out what customers want to pull into their lives. This is something that I'm looking for that I can't find on the market. I want a way of getting fit and healthy without having to leave my home or change my diet or stop drinking. If you can give me something like that, I'm your customer. And that's where you want to be looking at and listening to customers first and taking as much time as you need to. Because the numbers will only tell you a few things, but it won't tell you how a place feels and smells and how things might unfold. But your people, your potential customers will tell you that.
Yep, absolutely. It's already happening in Brazil as well. With Instagram, the same case that you talk about. Some knowledge innovation come from the clients that posted on LinkedIn or LinkedIn, not Instagram or Twitter, now X.
Yep.
So and now they starting get the customers, and I talk about the Brazilian companies inside of Brazil that they think that they know the clients, the customers in Brazil, and they even don't know, because some clients give to them the feedback on the media. So
yeah, so I think if anybody's listening and they think that might apply to them, then they should really just try that themselves and just get 12 people who are their customers, invite them to come to their office or go to where these people are, whether it's setting up a stand in a shopping mall or in a business center, and just having people come. You may need to give them some incentive, you may need to give them some discount, or you may need to give them some products, some gifts or something, but you ask them to come and speak to you. They say, would you mind if I ask you one question? And video you, and it's kind of like 2 or 3 minutes. And most people don't want to fill out an anketa because most people don't want to be interrogated. I mean, think about when you're on the internet and a window pops up and says, will you take 2 minutes to fill our questionnaire? What do?
No.
You close it, yeah? And 99% of people close it. But if I came to you, Ruth, and said, kind of, can you tell me about a moment, if you're in a bank, for example, I'm using the bank as an example because it's top of the mind for me. But if you're in a bank and I came up to you, Ruth, and said, Ruth, could you tell me about a positive or negative experience you've had with our bank? And that's the only question. That's interviewing you. I'm asking you about your experience. Yeah, I'm not asking you to say yes or no to 20 questions that are relevant for me and not relevant for you. I'm making the question relevant for you. And if you think about it, say, yeah, I will give you a 2-minute interview, and I don't interrupt. I don't say anything. I just interview you. And at the end of that, I may say, is this a positive or a negative story? When did it happen? Where did it happen? Yeah. And that's it. I've got the data about you, your gender, your age. So I've got quite rich data. So I can filter it and say, show me negative stories from women in this region who are talking about this branch or talking about this part of our operations. And once you've got these different videos, you can start to build up a library of show me the negative stories and tell me what do we need to stop doing. Show me the positive stories and tell me what we need to do more of. And once you start to build up that, you start to see, do we understand our customers? Are we aware of our customers? And the work I do is confidential, but I'm not going to mention the bank's name, but I can talk at a very high level. We went into this bank because the management thought that there were problems with customers, and those problems the customers were having were with the staff. And when we went in there, we got these stories from customers, we got these stories from the staff, and it found out that the customers loved the staff, and the staff had the same problems that the customers had, but it was management that was not seeing it. And so what you want to do, that's what you want to be getting on the front line. And if you're a leader, and I've been a general manager myself for a decade, the higher up the hierarchy you go, the further you are away from customers. And the less you understand what customers need. So you really want to get in touch with customers, but listen to the customers in their own words, and have that video with your team sitting around and looking at it and seeing what kind of innovative new insights you come out with. Because it could only just be one thing, but that one thing could change everything. Because if you're playing to win on the market, you win by discovering something new that others are not doing. You win by discovering a need that your users have that everybody's ignoring. And if you can find that first, then you can do something and gain an advantage over your rivals. And of course, you have to keep doing that. But that's what the best organizations do. They have a way of being able to not just do something once, but to do it consistently. And as I said, the golden principle would be focus on user needs, because that gets you out of the internal battles inside your organization, gets your head out of the spreadsheets, and it gets you looking at what matters, which is your users.
Yeah. Marcus, do you have any case that you're working with it for share with us that you would like share?
I just shared one. What other ones are you? What other ones? The stuff that I do is quite confidential. But do you have anything in particular that you'd like to hear about?
No. It's just would like to know if you have another. For example, you talk about the banks. So do you have another industry that you can share about what you talk about the user needs?
Yeah, so we're doing something. We're actually doing a project with a retailer that's moving into a different country for the first time, and that was interesting because they had is a good organization that has operations in several countries already, but they were moving into a bigger country, and a country that they kind of had experience with, but it was now they're moving in and committing to it a little bit more. So they've gone in with certain assumptions, and those assumptions I felt needed to be tested. So we didn't go down the path of market sensor because it's one step before that. It's really about the mapping process. So we wanted to understand, well, who do you think your users are? And they didn't know. So they're going into a country, they've committed finances to it, they've committed people to it. And then when we say, who are your users? They're not sure. So what are you going to do if you don't even know who you're selling to? So they have like a general idea. It's generally this market, but who are they? And if you don't know who your users are, you have no idea of what they want or what they need. So what you're doing is you're going in with your products to push them to the market. And that's going to be very, very painful. But this isn't, I'd like to think that this is quite rare that this happens. But I was working with a colleague of mine on a project in Europe. And this was a multi-billion euro company. And we were mapping things out. The idea was to go in and map. There's a new CEO. They were going to be changing the way that they approach the market. And we spent an hour mapping things out. We had two groups in two different rooms. Wasn't ideal. That's mainly because it was a senior team. So they'd taken rooms that were beautiful aesthetically, but they weren't very practical for doing any work in. So I had two different rooms, and I was having to go between the two different rooms where I would start with the first one. Who are your users? Yep, these are our users, right? What do they want? We'll have a debate. This is what they want. Okay, so if that's your users, and this is what they want, what do they need, or what are they looking for to satisfy their desires? Understood? Yeah, understood. So then I'd go to the other group, and I'd spend 15 minutes getting them to that point, and then understand. Yes, we understand. So I'll go back to the first group, and then the first group have gone backwards in those 15 minutes. They, instead of saying these are what the users need, then they start to debate who the users are. So I try to get them back on track. And this happened for about an hour with me going back and forth to the rooms. And I'm dealing with, I think it was about nine or 10 senior level people. We're talking senior, chief marketing officer, chief financial officer, chief operations officer, very senior people. And it took me an hour, and it shouldn't have taken that long. But this is this was a few years ago. And then I understood what the problem was. This company didn't even know who they're selling to. And they're a multi-billion euro organization. And that's because these are senior people whose jobs are really about, the chief marketing person knew about advertising, knew about clicks per user, or per dollar or euro spent. The CFO knew spreadsheets. The chief operations officer knew about infrastructure. Nobody had any concept of who the users were. And if they didn't know who the users were, they had no concept of what users wanted or what users needed or what they should be doing. This was a shock to me. But as I said, since then, I've realized, and I had a case quite recently where that's quite common. And I think it's a simple way of fixing things. It's just to make sure that Amazon do this. Amazon famously have an empty chair in their meetings, and that chair is meant to represent their user. And if anytime the meeting drifts from what the user would be interested in, they can snap it back and say, well, this is an internal discussion. We need to be constantly focused on what our users need. But Amazon is quite, in the West, Amazon is quite an exceptional company because they understand what users need or what users want. And what they want is a wide selection of goods, low prices, and fast delivery. But if you ask any organization what your users want, very few will be able to answer that succinctly. So that's a common thing that I come across where you can't even move to the second step if companies don't really understand who their customers are. And if they don't understand who their customers are, they don't know what they want, and therefore they have no idea what they should be doing except what they've always been doing. And I don't think in a world that we're in, doing what you've always done is really going to take you towards victory. It's a changing world. There's a lot of threats out there, but there's a lot of opportunities because the opportunities appear where there's uncertainty. And it's those companies that are brave enough, but also those companies that have clear vision. that can see things. And you don't want to look at things through your own eyes. You need to look at through the eyes of your users, because that will tell you things that nobody knows. And if you can see something that your users will tell you, this is the right direction, this is what's important to us, this is what your competitors are not doing for us, this will tell you where your strategy is. This will tell you what you should be doing. And so, yeah, that example is quite a common example of not thinking about your users. And the original case that I gave to you, at the moment they are starting to come around to the idea of starting small, getting close to users, and then taking it step by step from there. So, but that's an ongoing process.
My last question. Also, about, of course, we need to focus on user needs. But when we go, for example, for another country, we also need to take care about the context, the climate, and so on. In the Power Maps, I remember that that's the cycle with the stage of each situation. I already you told about the Chinese, each move that they're doing. So beyond the user needs, you need also be in the mind the step by step that the company should do for go for a foreign for another country.
Well, you said you want to talk maps in the next one, so I won't go too deeply into maps, because I did a podcast last week where I think I spoke for an hour about maps. But generally speaking, what's the value of a map? The way I explain it is that if you imagine you and I are in the middle of Beijing, neither of us speak Chinese, okay?
Yep.
And we're lost.
Absolutely.
What would we do?
Use Google if it's possible.
There you go. Get your phone out, and you'd open up a map. And what does a map tell you? It tells you firstly where you are. It tells you what's around you. And on that map, you can turn around and say, well, do we want to go there, Ruth? Do we want to go there, or do we want to go here? We make a decision together. The map's not telling us where to go, but we decide, because we can see, okay, we want to go there. And then the map gives us options. So how do we get there? Do we want to walk? Do we want to go by public transport? Do we want to go by car? Do we want to go the scenic route, or do we want to go the quickest route? And that's what a map actually gives you. So when I talk about focusing on user needs, you can't create a Wordly map without understanding user needs. But once you've got that, everything else, you know, that's what a user needs. So, and what does that need? And what does this need? And what does that need? And that's how you start to build up a map. And you can build a map very, very quickly. But that's the beauty, or actually the magic of a map, that once you can see it, we together can understand where we are. We can agree where we want to go to, and we can agree the options of how we can move there. Without that, what would we do? If we didn't have that map and we didn't speak Chinese, we would just be completely lost. We would have all we could see is the things around us. We'd have no idea whether going that way is taking us into where we want to go or away from where we want to go. And I think that's where a lot of organizations, especially those that go in to new businesses, new ventures, whether it's a new product line, whether it's a new country, if you're going in without a map, you're just guessing. And I've been in that, as I said, I've been in that situation where I'm the senior person in the company. And then it falls on your shoulders. And having this conversation with somebody yesterday, as a general manager, you really don't want to get things wrong. You don't want to get things wrong in front of your staff. Firstly, it's embarrassing, but secondly, they're looking for you sometimes to make decisions. So if it's a technical decision, you can say, I'll speak to my finance person, they make the decision and I support them. Or this is an operational decision, I can speak to my COO. But if it's a question about a strategic question, should we do it, should we not do it? The reason why a lot of companies don't do it is because the senior person in the organization doesn't have enough information to turn around and say, this is worth doing, this is not worth doing. If we do it and it goes wrong, it looks bad for all of us and it's bad for the business. So they make a decision not to do something. But in a world that's changing dramatically, not doing anything is not going to be a very good strategy, because your rivals are doing things. The example of the Chinese coming into this market. Western companies said, for now, we're not going to sell our cars in Russia. And they've lost the market. And this was their biggest market because, as I said, it's the largest European market. So doing nothing is not an option. But if you're a leader, you then are left with a choice of making a guess, which isn't a good strategy,
Yeah.
or then doing a lot of analysis. And that analysis is slow, it's expensive, and often it's confusing. What you actually need, I would say, is a map where you can gather your people together and different people and say, that's our understanding of where we currently are. Based on that, is there anything we're missing? Is there anything that we can add to? But if this is a fair reflection of the landscape, then what kind of moves can we make? And that's where the mapping method has multiple layers to it. So it's not just the actual map, but there are ways, there are questions in the method that enable you to understand how those things may change and where your options for action are. And with that, you can then start to make multiple moves, but it's never a plan. It's never, we're going to do one thing. What you want to do is do multiple things and see what works. If something works, you do more of that. If something doesn't work, you stop doing it and learn from it and redirect your resources to elsewhere. And so that goes back to the comment about Deng Xiaoping. You cross the river by feeling the stones. That's very much the Eastern way of doing things. It's like when Honda went into the United States in the 1960s. Very, very famous case study. I'm writing a book, and that's one of the chapters where that Honda case study is on every MBA course in the world about how Honda analyzed the market, they understood their customers, they found their segment, and they exploited it ruthlessly with marketing. But then there was somebody who interviewed the actual Honda guys who went to America, and they said, is this, this was a brilliant strategy? And the guy said, no, our only strategy was to go to America and to see if we could sell anything. We had no idea whether we could sell anything. And I write about it in the chapter of my book where they just had a failure after failure, mistake after mistake, accident after accident, but they just stumbled their way through it and got lucky. And that's the idea, is that if you stick to a plan, you're only focused on one thing. But if you have a map, you don't need to focus on one route. It's like somebody giving you, I want to get from my hotel to Tiananmen Square, and somebody gives us instructions and we have to follow those instructions all the way. But if you have a map, you can turn around and say, okay, we don't want to go that way. We're going to go this way. And it keeps your options open. And I think when you go to a new market or you're running something where there's a lot of uncertainty, you don't want to have a plan, because your plan's going to be flawed, because it's going to be based on information that you don't have, or it's going to be based on an understanding of that market which is unsophisticated because you're new to it. What you want is to have some kind of map that allows you to learn as you go, but to make moves quickly. And when you, as I said, when you find something that you do well, you do more of it. And if you find that something that you're doing isn't working, stop it, learn, and redirect your resources elsewhere. So it becomes more of a journey. And this is very much the Eastern approach to strategy, which is what the mapping approach is based upon. It's about awareness of your environment and adapting as you go. And if you look at companies like Amazon, Netflix, Airbnb, all of these use mapping, but all of these are companies that are great at having a direction. That's what we want to do. Moving quickly, not waiting for months and months to make a decision or to make a move, but not going all in on a move. They try it, and if it doesn't work, it doesn't kill them. It doesn't collapse the company. But if they find that first step is good, well, then they have confidence to do the next step. And I think for any organization that's looking to go into another country, you want to be not trying to boil the ocean, not trying to figure everything out before you make a move. Have enough information where you can take a step, and that step is small enough that if you have to step back again, it's not going to embarrass you or harm the company, but make those steps. And as we spoke about some of those steps on this call, about speaking to customers, trying to have insights about what you can try, making the first step to get out there and taking it step by step, but doing it at speed. And I think that's something that I think a lot of organizations will have to get to grips with, is time as a weapon. So everybody knows about financial resources are very powerful. People know about human resources as being very powerful, but I think you need to put time on that, because that's how the Chinese do things. There's something called China speed, where they do things so much quicker than the rest of us. And we're all going to have to catch up with that. Otherwise, we're all going to be losing. And that's great. That's, I mean, competition is good for raising the game. So, yeah. I think it's going to be an interesting decade. It's already an interesting decade. It's going to be a more interesting decade for the business world, I think.
Yeah, for the moment, there's a lot of change in a lot of parts in the world, even in America, South America, and also in North America. So yes, we are in a moment of change, and we need to be quickly to adapt to it.
But I think from living in Russia as well, there's a lot of uncertainty. Developing economies, I think, lack confidence in themselves. They look at developed economies like North America or Western Europe and say, well, they do things better. But I think in an uncertain world, Brazil has dealt with a lot of uncertainty. Russia's dealt with a lot of uncertainty. The companies from these countries should be better at dealing with uncertainty because they have a lot more experience of it. And companies from countries where things have been stable, where there haven't been revolutions, where there haven't been coups, where there haven't been wars, where there haven't been sanctions, these type of companies in these countries will be, I think, at a disadvantage when everything becomes more uncertain, because the world is almost certainly changing quite dramatically. My original education is history, so for me, this is the most fascinating period that I've been through since the collapse of the Soviet Union. This is monumental, what's happening in the world. But I think a lot of organizations, a lot of people have anxiety because there's a huge amount of uncertainty. But that's what we've seen with Russia. They've had no choice about dealing with it. And because they're vastly educated people, hugely educated people, and there's a huge number of them, they've been able to adapt very quickly. And I think that's where the advantage hopefully will come for countries such as Brazil and Russia and other developing economies, because they have experience with this. They're not going to be they're not going to be frightened into acting. It's a question of being brave and smart at the same time. And I think having a map is a very smart way of feeling your way forwards. You don't want to jump. You don't want to suddenly jump and find that you're jumping off the edge of a cliff. You want to make steps. Make them quick, but make them small enough that you can recover from them.
I think I introduced to you the gambiarra from Brazil. It's kind of something that we innovated all time when you have some problem. How Brazilian is very creative with all the problems that they have. And the problem is, as we are educated to looking for Europe and North America for in all the development that they did, we didn't are proud of ourselves. When I was in Russia, I find the same, and Russia has a huge technology and the brightest mind in the world, but they felt themselves like unconfident at all.
That's changed in the last 18 months, Ruth. That's what's so dramatically different here. Yeah, and maybe that will come to Brazil as well. But you're right that confidence is a major obstacle in developing economies, because they feel that others are better. But in an uncertain world, I think these countries potentially have an advantage because they're used to the uncertainty. But where there's uncertainty, that's where the new sources of value are, because nobody else is doing it. There's no value in launching in launching a soft drink, because there are so many soft drinks on the market. But there's a huge amount of value in launching something at the moment that's with AI, because it's all new. And you might get it right, you might get it wrong. But if you get it right, it could be tremendously valuable. How do you know whether it's right? I go back to my original point. Do users need that? If they do, do that. Yeah. So yeah, I mean, it is going to be interesting times. But once countries like the ones that you are from and that I'm living in have confidence in themselves, and I've seen that happen in Russia, yeah, we will be having new examples to follow. We'll be having new heroic companies that we can learn from, because we're definitely learning from China. That's because they are doing some very interesting things from China, and that's why they took over the car market here, and that's why all of us need to be getting better. Otherwise, everything will be made in China. Needs certain things to be made in Brazil, certain things to be made in Russia as well.
No, Brazil as well. Brazil that has a huge and big industry, but the majority of the business think that Brazil is enough, because Brazil also is like Russia is big, is the 50th country in the world that's big. So, but we have a huge industry. The point is the less confidence, and we change soon. I hope so.
Yeah, well,
No,
let's hope.
Marcus, thank you so much for your
You're welcome.
interview, for coming, for sharing with us all your knowledge and all your information, and think about how we can make better things for companies go around the world. And we prepare ourselves for the next one, and the next one will be power maps. And we can explore more about these subjects that we already speak here. So thank you so much.
You're welcome.
And I hope see you soon.
Likewise. Okay, thanks, Ruth. It was a pleasure. Pleasure chatting to you.
Bye.
Take care.